Well, welcome to the 2019 version of the Celebration of the Arts and Sciences. We picked for our topic this year, logic. I didn't realize how wide a topic that was until we started sorting through, well, should we go in this direction? Should we go in that direction? There's a lot to logic. And I think it's worthy of our study. Combined with last year's convocation on civility, we're inching towards piecing together a package here, and it's working well for us so far. We have two speakers today. I believe that Luke Shorty, Worshipful Brother Shorty, will be starting off.
Wow, thanks for the promotion.
Worshipful?
Not yet.
No? I thought you'd been through the chair.
Just regular brother.
Okay, well, that's all right. I love regular brothers. Anyway, we'll get you through the chair sooner or later. And we have, for a special guest, Dr. James Page. I can read the entire biography, but it's in the pamphlet if you want to read it. I'm going to say this man's the top educator in the state of Maine.
That's very generous.
And he specializes in logic. So I'm looking forward to this day. I'd like to thank, first of all the regents that showed up. Of course, myself, I sit as a chair on the camera. Dan Goucher is my assistant chair. Luke Shorty, plain old brother Luke. He's the dean of the college this year. Dr. Walter McDougall was a co-founder of the Maine Masonic College. He and his son George are not here today because the dates get crammed in and National History Day competitions are going on today. Dr. McDougall takes great interest in that program, and so does his son George, and they're both judging at that event today. As I would be, and probably two or three others in the room would be if the dates had not collided. Right Worshipful Brother Richard Bowden, also a regent. We have Worshipful Brother Carl Furtado, a regent. Dr. Christopher Howard is not here. He was our dean last year. I believe he's been recalled to Georgia. He's has some troubles in the family. His father's quite sick, so he's had to spend quite a bit of time down south. Dr. Eric Kuntz, also a co-founder of the Maine Masonic College. Worshipful Brother George McDougall, recently added back to the fold of regent.
Don,
right? Sorry,
part of the McDougall.
Your two names are side by side.
You're right.
Don. Worshipful Brother Dan Starbird, Dr. Dan Starbird,
Thanks,
also a regent.
Thanks, most worshipful.
And somewhere there he is, right Worshipful Brother Doug Taft. So we have a lot of regents in the room.
Anyways, I do want to bring you the greetings from Most Worshipful Mark Rustin. He was going to be here. Believe it or not, he was going to shoot up here. He was going to go to Northport, shoot here, and then shoot right back to Northport. And I said, you know what? What in the world are you going to do that for? So, anyways, he agreed that it was probably better that I be here on his behalf and on behalf of the Grand Lodge of Maine. Everything that the regents do in the college is certainly appreciated by all the brethren and even non-brethren, everybody who is involved in the college. And I'd like to see a bigger turnout today, but it seems like we have a few other conflicting events going on. But I'm sure that everybody who is here today will certainly enjoy the topic that's being presented. Logic seems to be something that is sparse in many cases when we're making decisions. And but anyways, I'm not gonna hold you up. I just want to thank you for being here, and I'm going to enjoy this morning and this afternoon as well as the rest of you. So thank you very much for being here. I'll talk to you as we have a little bit of a break here. Okay?
Hi everybody, how are you?
Good.
I know, it's good to see that there are enough people around tables because this actually is going to be an active session. So you're going to have to do some work. So make sure you feel comfortable talking to the folks around your table because logic is not necessarily a passive sport. Hopefully you'll all be engaged in some level of analytical athletics today. So before we get started, does anyone know how to dim these lights, or at least the front ones? It's a logical question to ask. All right, let's see what this one does. Nope. And probably not this one, it's probably the other ones. Oh good, my logic's working. There we go. Can you guys see that all right? Perfect. So, first and foremost, my name is Luke Shorty. I'm a member of Limestone Lodge number 214, though I currently live and work in Lee, so I visit Horeb every second Tuesday of the month when I can, when I'm not all over the place. My training is in mathematical sciences. I got my master's from Montana State University, as you saw in my bio. So today what we're going to do is we're going to talk about logic, from recreation to computer science. Or, anyone remember Rocky and Bullwinkle? What? Logic can be fun and interesting? Go ahead, hit the... You guys remember Rocky and Bullwinkle used to always have two titles? I don't know why that was, but I kind of like that, so going along that theme. So, at any point in this lecture, or this discussion that we're going to have, feel free to ask questions, to process out loud, either with your neighbor, or I'll invite you to process with me, because we're going to go through a bunch of stuff. Let's take a look at the agenda. So, the menu for today's analytical aperitif, before you get to the main course of logic throughout history with Dr. Page, is we're going to do an overview of what recreational logic is. Is there anyone here who does like Sudoku? Anyone here do crossword puzzles? Anyone here do nonograms? Anyone heard of a nonogram? We can talk about that a little bit later. Mazes, there are different types of logic mazes. Riddles. Anyone like a good riddle? A couple people? Good. What about logic problems where you see that it's gridded out and you figure out there's a German, a Frenchman, an Englishman, one's name is Bob, one's name is Kelly, one's name is Sally, somebody owns a fish, and they give you a bunch of facts and you have to answer the question, what pet does Sally have, or something like that. We're going to go and look at that whole spectrum of logic in a recreational manner. From there, we're going to kind of pivot into something that's kind of in the middle ground, and that's called the Lawson selection task. Anyone ever heard of it? That's good. You'll hear about it today then. And then we'll talk a little bit about how logic has evolved into computer science. And we'll teach you a thing or two about how to impress friends at parties as well using logic. Yes?
Just a quick question. Are spatial games also a form of logic?
They can be, absolutely. As a matter of fact, we're going to talk about a gentleman named Sam Lloyd, and he claimed that he invented the 15 puzzle. What's that? You ever see one of those little squares? Sometimes you get them at your birthday parties, a little handout. They have space for 16 squares, but there are only 15 of them, and you got to work them around and try to find some way to get the 1 through 15 lined up. That's a spatial type logical game, as is the Rubik's Cube and some of those things you see at truck stops with all the little pegs saying, well, how the heck do I get it so there's only one peg left? I'm not going to spoil that one for you because I honestly don't know myself. But yeah, those are a type of logic puzzle. So, shall we get started?
Yes.
All right, next slide please. Recreational logic, starting with riddles, because riddles are basically some of the oldest logical puzzles that we have. Remember that guy on the right? Who's that? The Riddler! So the Riddler's going to join us on our talk here for a little bit. Again, they tend to be simple questions where you either have to think kind of outside the box or use reasoning to kind of deduce what the answer is. So we're going to start with a is there anyone who hates riddles? No? Wow, I was hoping to make a convert today. So, let's go to the first one. What gets wetter the more it dries? When you think you know what it is, put your hand on your head. If you aren't certain, take some seat time right now and talk to your neighbor around your table, to do so quietly, but think about it and talk to your neighbor if you can see if you can figure it out. What do you think it is?
Soft towel.
A bath towel. That is, survey says,
Click.
it is a towel. Right? The more you dry with it. So what's the key here? What happened? It's this word right here. When you hear the word dries, you think about, oh, something's drying off. There's water coming off of it. But really, it's the activity of drying off. So that was the easy one. So, that's all right. Bear with me. Let's go back 4,000 or so years ago to Samaria. Next puzzle, our next riddle. There is a house. One enters into it blind and comes out seeing. What is it? There is a house. One enters in it blind and comes out seeing. What is it? Again, when you think you know, you can do this. Now, ancient Samaria. Anyone know anything about the ancient Sumerians? It's a culture that really valued something that would help give guidance to this riddle here. I'm going to give you again 15, 20 seconds. Talk amongst your neighbors and your friends. What could it be? Think out loud. There is a house. One enters into it blind and comes out seeing. It's going to be an active one.
Have to discuss that.
Yeah, discuss a little bit. Discuss a little bit. Again, if you're quiet and you don't talk to your neighbors, it's going to be a real boring 90 minutes. You think you know what it is?
I'm probably wrong.
No, if you know what it is,
I don't.
let
I
me
can't hold
know.
my hand up.
That's perfect. Just look like you're sleeping.
Okay.
Anyone want to take a guess at it? Maybe you aren't certain enough to do this. What do you think it is? A Masonic lodge. Why do you say that? That's a good guess.
No, you go into it seeking light.
You go into it seeking
When
light.
you go into it, you're blindfolded,
Yeah.
and you don't have light. And then after you start your degrees, you start to get your light.
You get more light. You get to see. Right. That's a good guess. Any Masonic historians in the room? Did ancient Samaria actually have? I don't think Masonry goes back that far. So, but that's a great guess because you're very close. What's your guess?
House of education?
A house of education, also called a
School.
yes. Survey says it is a school. So the ancient Sumerians were interested in education and making sure they could understand the world around them. And so this is a riddle from ancient Samaria. Thousands of years old. People were thinking about that question that I just gave you for thousands of years. And you figured it out. See, you were just as smart as we were way back then. What's the next slide? Anyone read the Odyssey? You may know this one. What goes on 4 legs in the morning, 2 legs at noon, and 3 legs in the evening? Put your hand on your head if you think you know what it is. Close. What's your guess?
House of education?
A house of education, also called a
School.
yes. Survey says it is a school. So the ancient Sumerians were interested in education and making sure they could understand the world around them. And so this is a riddle from ancient Samaria. Thousands of years old. People were thinking about that question that I just gave you for thousands of years. And you figured it out. See, you were just as smart as we were way back then. What's the next slide? Anyone read the Odyssey? You may know this one. What goes on 4 legs in the morning, 2 legs at noon, and 3 legs in the evening? Put your hand on your head if you think you know what it is. Tables that don't, again, you get time to talk amongst yourselves. Those of you who have your hand on your head, give some hints. Don't give it away. Just help your partner process. Help your partner process. Talk amongst yourselves. It walks. What goes on 4 legs in the morning, 2 legs at noon, and 3 legs in the evening? Let's see, I talked to this table, we talked to these 2 tables. What do you think?
Oh, it's a man.
It's a man, survey says. It is a human. See, look. You start on 4, 2 at noon, 3 in the evening, and then none. Wait in the middle of the night. So, Anyone feeling like this nowadays?
Yeah.
What's the next riddle? What do we got next? Here's a good one from England. I don't have, some of you do have pencils and pens on your tables, so you may need them for this. As I was going to St. Ives, I met a man with 7 wives. Each wife had 7 sacks. Each sack had 7 cats. Each cat had 7 kits. Kits, cats, sacks, and wives. How many were there going to St. Ives? Talk amongst yourselves. And if you got a pen, start doing the ad if you need to.
That's all mystery.
Yeah.
That's what puzzles tend to be. Any answer over here? I've hit almost every other table. How many people are going to St. Ives? 1? What do you mean? I got 7 wives and cats and sacks. How come only 1?
He was going to St. Ives. They were coming from.
That's right. Survey says 1. I was the only one going to St. Ives. Everyone else was coming away from it. And there's a nice picture of St. Ives. Anyone ever been to St. Ives? I've never been yet.
I'm sure you have.
Not yet. Not yet. Okay. Ready for another one? This one is another literary one. Can anyone tell me where this riddle comes from? I haven't heard much from this table.
I'm quiet.
You're quiet? Not like a raven. No. Any thoughts? How about you guys?
That wasn't Donnie Oakland said he was quiet.
Not a clue. What color are writing desks? That's a good question. Depends on what they're made of. Anybody from this table want to take a swing? Well, here's one answer to this.
Other than the raven is the McDougal bird.
Ooh, I did not know that.
So, yeah, well, the raven also has legs, but...
As does a table, right? So does a pelican and other things. Here's one answer. I haven't the slightest idea. The Mad Hatter. This riddle actually comes from Alice in Wonderland. So Lewis Carroll wrote this. Lewis Carroll was a mathematician and a logician, and this was one of the riddles that was in is in Alice in Wonderland. It's not like it left the book, and so there was never an answer in that book. And so all the fans who listened to Alice in Wonderland would continue to ask over and over and over again, why is a raven like a writing desk? And finally, Lewis Carroll, in one of the later editions of Alice in Wonderland, wrote this in the foreword. Yeah. Because it can produce a few notes, though they are very flat, and it is never put with the wrong end in front. What happens if you take that misspelled word and put the wrong end in the front? Raven. You get raven. It's raven backwards, right? So Lewis Carroll wrote that as his response to all of his fans as one of the answers. Now, because this is one of those famous unsolved or unanswered riddles, a lot of people came up with answers to it, whether it's like they both have wings, or I try to remember if I remember reading one about opening up or not, but there is a puzzler who was an American puzzle connoisseur in the late 19th century, early 20th century. His name's Sam Lloyd. We'll talk about him a little bit more here shortly. And he had 2 answers to it, and they are as follows. That the notes for which they are noted are not noted for being musical notes. So the pun on the word note, he thought was a real clever answer to that. And then somebody said Poe. Who said Poe? Right? Poe did write about ravens. And so Sam wrote, well, because Poe wrote on both. He wrote on ravens, and he wrote on writing tables. So those are riddles in a nutshell. Anyone else have a good riddle they want to share before
One
we...
is a rest for pens, and the other one's a pest for wrens, right?
That is one. You must have used it. I see that. Very nice, right word. Does anyone have any other riddles they'd like to share before we move on to the next topic? Yes.
Why did Liberace play with these 2 fingers?
Why did
Piano?
Liberace play with these 2 fingers on the piano? Why did Liberace play with these 2 fingers on the piano? Anyone want to help me process this one out? Let's see,
Is it
Liberace.
why did he or why didn't he?
Why didn't he?
Oh, why didn't he?
Why
He
did he
did
not? Why did he not?
Liberace.
He didn't have them.
No, did he really not have those two fingers?
Heck.
Let's see, this is your index and your pointer.
I would think with piano.
No, this is your index, your middle and your pointer. Middle and your pointer. He didn't get the pointer, in the middle of the... Anyone else have thoughts on how we could approach this?
Restate the question again?
Why didn't Liberace play with these two fingers?
Yeah.
You think you know it?
Well, think of there's the key word there. There's a key word in the question.
Why didn't Liberace play with these?
Go right back to your first riddle. Think of what that showed. Then think
Ah! Because he played the piano. Back to that first riddle. What was the key on that first riddle?
The active word dries.
The acting word was dries, right? So a towel dries, it gets wetter because its job is to dry something.
Why doesn't he play?
Why doesn't he play with these two fingers? I feel like there's something that has to do with keys.
Yeah, no, he's got it.
I have it? Why doesn't he play with these two fingers? Because they don't make any sound. You can't snap. Is that it? No, that's a good one. I like that. Why doesn't he play with these? This is the part where someone who knows the answer is like, oh my gosh, you're right there. Why are you not getting it? Why doesn't he play with these two fingers?
He needs him to play the piano.
Is that it? He needs it to play with the piano? That's a good answer. Play with these notes. Think back to that first riddle. It has something to do with that action word, play.
He doesn't actually play.
It's piano plays.
It's the piano that plays. Is that the answer? No, that was a good one too. We gotta be close. No? All right. Shall we?
Because Liberace is not using these actual two fingers, this guy's fingers, so.
Because I
Oh! He doesn't play. He plays with his fingers, not yours.
Fingers.
There it is. The word was these. These two fingers. They're not his. That's right. My gosh, that was good.
You can use that in class.
Whew. I could use that in the classroom. You know, I find it fascinating. If I may take a quick tangent before we get to the next recreational logic piece. I find it interesting. Those of us who have gone through the degrees realize we take a walk up a flight of winding stairs. There's 7 liberal arts and sciences. And there's there's a reason to why they're ordered the way that they're ordered, right? What's the first one? Does anyone remember? Grammar. And then what?
Rhetoric.
No, rhetoric. Grammar, how to put words together. Rhetoric, how to use them. Logic, how to think with them. And then what? Arithmetic, mathematics. And we're going to see a little bit of arithmetic here as well. So, let's hit the next slide. Deduction problems. Now that your minds are all warmed up and ready to roll, these deduction problems, they involve logic, critical thinking, to answer questions, or to actually think about logical conundrums. Can things actually happen? Is it realistic? Is it possible? Is it impossible? So let's talk about a couple, 2 American puzzlers and some of their puzzling proposals. The first one is Sam Lloyd, again, late 19th century, early 20th century. He was prolific in the number of puzzles he wrote. The Encyclopedia of Puzzles you can get online, and it's free of charge. It's in the public domain now. There are 5,000 puzzles in there. Some of them do have typos. Some of their solutions aren't accurate. I've worked through a couple of them. He was a very avid competitive chess player. Anyone do chess puzzles? where you look at a chessboard and it says, okay, it's black's move and they need to checkmate in 5 moves. That's something he loved to do. He was actually, I think, ranked 18th best chess player in the world at some point. But he was also known as a huckster and a snake oil salesman. He claimed to be the one who invented that 15 puzzle. It wasn't him. There was a guy who had a patent on that puzzle way back in 1880 or 1870, a whole decade before he was touting that he was the one who invented it. There was a logician and a mathematician and a puzzle maker in England who thought this guy was the devil because they were collaborating, and he basically stole those puzzles and claimed them as his own. But his puzzles are kind of fun. And so here's a logical mind stumper to make you say, huh, what do you do here? Next slide. So there's a certain king. He builds this bridge in his kingdom. And in the middle of the bridge, he puts up a gallows, right? A hangman's gallows. And he says, okay, any person that's about to cross this bridge is going to be interrogated as to their destination. Where are they going? If they told the truth, they were permitted to pass unharmed. But if they answered falsely, they were to be hanged on a gallows erected at the center of the bridge. Ugh, grisly. And so, one day, a man is about to cross and is asked the usual question. And he says, I'm going to be hanged on the gallows. What happens next? I'm going to be hanged on the gallows.
Yeah.
Right?
I see the conundrum.
So what happens? Let's pick one of the pathways. He's either doing what? He's either telling the truth or he's lying. So which one do we want to go through first?
Well, if he's telling the truth.
Yes.
Passes unharmed, but it passes.
If he's telling the truth, what happens? He gets to
Yeah.
pass unharmed.
Except, yeah.
But if he passes unharmed,
He's not telling the truth.
he's lied. Well, if he's lied, then what
He
happens?
hangs on the gallows.
He gets hanged, but then he what?
He told the truth.
Then he told the truth, so he should pass unharmed. And at this point, the bridge explodes, and that's the end of the story. I mean, and so logic has the capability. You have to be careful when you use it. And when you use it, sometimes you can come up with statements that aren't possible, right? They're not consistent. You can't really arrive at a deduction. The wires got crossed.
Is there a name for that dilemma?
I don't know, what is the traditional name for it?
It's a version of the liar paradox.
Right, but it's so the liar paradox is one from ancient Greece, I believe, right?
Well, it's actually in the Bible.
What's the example in the Bible?
All Cretans are liars, said the Cretan.
All Cretans are liars, said the Cretan. And then, well, then he can't be a Cretan because he just told the truth. But then, if that's the case, then he is a Cretan. So, yeah, that's cool. Which book is that in?
It's in I believe it's in one of Paul's letters.
That's awesome. That's cool. So it goes back thousands of years. Next slide. Great question. Raymond Smullyan was born in 1919, so just shortly after Sam Lloyd passed away, and just passed away a couple years ago. Anyone here watch Johnny Carson? So he was actually a guest on the Carson Show back in the late 80s. And he's got a ton of books. These are just 3 of the most noteworthy ones that I think if you are interested in logic and want to pursue it closer, what is the name of this book is a good one to start with. The Lady or the Tiger is actually based on a short story. Has anyone read that short story? Right, where there are 2 doors, there's a lady behind one, a tiger behind the other. And so he comes up with a series of riddles based around that short story. And the riddle of Scheherazade. So these would be good books for you to start looking into. And believe it or not, it helps you kind of ease your way into something called Gödel's incompleteness theorem, which I think you'll probably touch upon a little bit in your talk.
Very brief.
Very briefly, that's totally fine. at one point, and if I start to steal your thunder, wave at me, okay? At one point, there were a couple of mathematicians, Bertrand Russell and what was Whitehead's first name? Alfred Whitehead, were actually going to axiomize all of mathematics, right? And say, here are all the assumptions you need. You can build all of mathematics from here on out. But Newton had his Principia, well, I guess Principia, what's the other word? Which one? Newton. Isaac Newton, his thing was just Principia Mathematica, right? So his was, hey, this is all you need to figure out physics. Well, Russell and Whitehead were trying to do the same thing. And then this mathematician came along in the mid-20th century, early mid-20th century, Kurt Gödel, who said, wait a minute, you actually can't do that. You can't axiomize mathematics and have it be consistent, right? You either, if you're trying to make it complete, you're going to have some consistency problems. And it's really a fascinating read. And believe it or not, some of these books help you kind of grasp that idea. To me, when I first wrapped my head around that theory, anyone hear of a mathematician named George Cantor? Cantor? So Cantor actually makes this mathematical proof that there are different size infinities. And that could be a different talk for a totally different day. But when I first wrapped my head around the idea of different size infinities, it changed my world. It changed the way that I looked at things. I was blown away by it. Same thing happened when I wrapped my head around Gödel's incompleteness theorem. It just kind of shifts how you realize the world works. So, but to get there, you've got to have an understanding of logic. And these books, I think, would help you out with that. So, that being said, let's see a couple of riddles from Ray. First one is the politician puzzle. A certain convention, maybe down in Augusta, has 100 politicians at it. Each politician was either crooked or honest. We're given the following two facts. So here are two facts you have. One, at least one of the politicians was honest. Two, given any two of the politicians, at least one of the two is crooked. Can it be determined from those two facts how many of the politicians were honest and how many were crooked? Take some time, talk amongst yourselves. I'll be coming back for you to try to figure it out. And Dick, this could be done with lawyers, by the way, as well, just so you know.
Thanks, brother.
So, talk amongst yourselves. See if you can figure out, how many politicians are crooked and how many are honest? That's a good guess.
5.
Yeah, 25 crooked, yeah, 50-50. It's one guess, 50-50 I hear again over there. You think 50-50? Show of hands if you think it's 50-50, put your hand up. If you think it's something different, put your hand sideways. So sideways is different, hands up is 50-50. Okay? Talk to me about your thought process. What do you think?
Me?
Yeah.
Well, one of them's honest. And then when you get two together, at least one of them is crooked. That doesn't mean that one's honest and one's crooked. They can both be crooked.
They could.
So I'm saying there's 99 crooked politicians. But the truth of the matter is, we know. I won't say it.
There you have it. He's right. We know at least one of them is honest according to these facts. So one. But given any two, you pick out two, at least one of the two is crooked. So you always have a crooked one. So you could either have one crooked and one honest, or two crooked and no honest. So only one of them is honest in this puzzle right here.
So you're talking only one is honest out of 100?
Out of this group, with those two facts, that's correct. With these two facts, that's what we can deduce using logic. All right, next slide. Puzzle.
You're sure the answer is no?
I am positive the answer is not no. This slide may need a couple of taps because as I was converting it to Google, there we go. The portrait puzzle. This is a fun one. Anyone heard of this one before? So, a man is looking at a painting, and referring to the person in that painting, he says, brothers and sisters, I have none. But this man's father is my father's son. Who is in the painting? Brothers and sisters, I have none. But this man's father is my father's son.
He's looking at himself.
He's a painting of himself? What are other people thinking? Raise your hand and said, yeah, that's definitely himself. Wait a minute, why not? Is it because you're here in Logic Land?
I think it's his son, picture of his son.
Why do you say a picture of his son?
Well, because this man's father, so the son's father
This man's father.
is my father's son, which he would be.
My father's son is himself. How come it's nobody else? Because brothers and sisters, I have none. So if he has no brothers or sisters, his father's son is who?
No.
And so this man's father is me.
So it's got to be.
So if this man's father is me, it is actually a painting of his son, not himself. But when you first read it, you're like, well, that's got to be him. It's got to be himself. He's looking at his own portrait. No, it is his son. See, look how happy he is doing logic. Next slide.
That's not happy, that's misdirection.
Right, it's one of those misdirections. And so be aware of that, because misdirection is kind of the key to this in magic. So, next slide. The Island of Knights and Knaves. Professor Smullian loved some of these truth and lie puzzles. There's one about a whole country of humans and vampires, insanity versus insanity. He adds all these twists to them, and he'll walk you through as you start trying to deduce what's going on in these places. So, on this fictional island, all inhabitants are either knights or knaves. Now, all knights, they always tell the truth. Every knave lies. So, John and Bill are residents on the island's knight and knaves, and John says, we are both knaves. Who is what? Go ahead, talk amongst yourselves, by all means. Process this through. It's tough, it's tricky. Is there enough information there? Maybe there's not enough information. Sometimes you get puzzles, you're like, oh, I can't solve it. Is there enough information? Sure. Who said sure? How come? Just walk us down the path.
John is making a definitive statement.
Yes?
It can't be true if there's only two people on the island and one is a knight and one is a
Oh, no, there are multiple people. They're just two of the residents on the island. There could be thousands of people on the island. These two just happen to live there. So one is a knight, or one is a knave, or they're both knights, or they're both knaves.
Oh, okay.
They're both knaves because...
They're both knaves?
It's a lie because they're on a fictional island that doesn't exist.
Oh, come on now. That is a good one. It's true.
Here's what my mind is telling me.
What's your mind telling?
John says,
we
are both knaves.
We are both knaves.
If he was a knight, he's lying.
If he was a knight, it's interesting that you approach it that way. What is he? So if he's a knight, he's lying.
Okay, because, well,
Which makes him a knave.
we know that. So John is definitely a knave. There's
Okay.
only knights or knaves on the island.
Well, what's Bill?
No, he's not a knight. Bill must be a knight.
Why?
Because John has made a falsehood statement when he says we are both knaves. John's a knave, we proved that. If that's a false statement, then Bill's got to be a knight.
That's a very interesting way of working it through, and that is the correct deduction. I tend to go the other way. I tend to look at the statement and say if the statement is true, instead of making an assumption of what is John, what he could be, and what falls from that, in these ones, I tend to work at the statement level and try to process over. So, I'll show you how my thoughts went. You deduced the correct answer. We're both knaves. Let's say it was true. Well, if it's a true statement, that means John must be a knight. Well, if that's the case, then this would be a false statement. If this is a false statement, the only way it's false, we know John can't be a knight, so he must be a knave. The only way it's false is if they are both not the same thing. And so, we know John is a knave, Bill must be the opposite, Bill must be a knight. And so I try that, I usually deduce it from this direction instead of making the assumption on what John is. But they both both get you there. So here's a fun little one. Recreational logic problems. So logic problems tend to look like this. If you like these types of things, I really encourage you to go to where I got this, which is the puzzle baron. If you go to the next slide, it increases it a little bit more. So what these look like. I was looking at the time. Maybe we've got enough time to do an hour. We'll see. Let me at least explain them to you. Anyone ever done one of these before? Couple hands. They're really fun, actually, believe it or not. So you have this grid, and what this grid is to do is to help you with your deduction as you move along, given these assumptions here. So here's a logic puzzle. It has first names, football teams, and last names along the horizontal. Days off, last names, and football teams. I wonder if I can get that a little more in focus. Let me just see here. Is that a little better?
Yeah.
Along the vertical. And so you're trying to fill out this grid. Who has Monday off? What's their favorite football team? And what's their last name? And you should be able to determine that given these 8 facts right here. Ooh, there actually may be a 9th fact there, and if that's the case, then we're in trouble. The one who has Tuesday off is a Jets fan, right? So what can you do? You can look at Tuesday, and you can look at Jets, and you could go up here and put a circle right here, right? And then you'll be able to cross out that because you know the person who has Tuesday off is the Jets fan. So right there you can put Jets fan, right? And so you're able to fill that out. The second one says the person whose last name is Knapp has a day off later in the week than the person whose last name is Salazar. Now notice I don't have any cross-reference here on days off, so I have to play in this column, which crosses your days off with your last names. What can you deduce from this? You can say a person whose last name is Knapp has a day off later in the week. Well, if it's later in the week, that means what day can he not have off?
Monday.
He can't have Monday off. So we can cross that out, right? Later than the week than the person whose last name is Salazar. So when can Salazar not have a day off? Same logic. If Knapp cannot have a day off on Monday, Salazar, who's going to be later in the week, can't have a day off when?
Right.
On Friday, because it would force Knapp to fall right off the chart. Owen does not have Fridays off and isn't the Jets fan. So then you can go over here and say Owen doesn't have Fridays off and he's not a Jets fan. And so you go through these steps and fill this out. And believe it or not, like a Sudoku, you're able to go through and answer all these pieces out. So it's a good way to keep your mind sharp, right? So if this sounds like something fun, I don't think I have enough time to actually fill this whole thing out. But if it does sound fun, and I like folks who are taking notes here, the Puzzle Baron would be a good place to go. It will automatically generate these. You can change the difficulty level on them. This is a 3x3, a 3x4. Yeah, 3x4. You've got 3 categories, 4 things here. They go all the way up to 5x5s. I mean, they can get pretty complicated. But if you like this type of thing, I think a logic puzzle a day sometimes keeps the psychologist away, dementia away. There it is, dementia away. Everybody, take a piece of paper that if you have one and if you have an extra pen, we're going to do this together as a group. Now, you know that months are numbered 1 through 12. 1 being January, 12 being December. Here's a nice parlor game for you to try at home amongst your friends. Take the number of the month you were born in. Multiply it by 2. Take out your calculator or your little phone for this. That's cool. That's totally cool. Add 5. When you're done, multiply that number by 50. It's easy. You can add a 0 and multiply by 5. Once you have that number, add your age to it. Then I want you to subtract 365 from that number. That last step, usually if you're at a party or something, you say, oh, 365, that was too much. Please add back in 115. And once you've done that, put your hand on your head. What number is yours?
163.
163. You're 63 years young and you were born in January.
565.
May! I'm also a May baby, 65 years old.
Not yet.
Well, I will be in May.
Dick,
476.
you were born in April. You're 76 years old. So, wait, you said 476?
Yeah.
You're 76 years old? You don't look a day over 72.
Yeah, good.
Jim, what was your number?
1266.
Born in December, 66 years young. How is this happening? What's going on here? You want to look under the hood? Anyone want to look under the hood? I'll walk you through it. Yeah, this guy's mesmerized. He's like, what is happening? Next slide. Let's do a little algebra. So, remember arithmetic? The next part of your journey? Well, this is where it comes in. Let M be the month you were born. 2 times M is 2M. Then I have you add 5. 2M plus 5. Okay? If you are over 100 years old, by the way, this no longer works, but we can talk about that in a bit. 2M plus 5. And then I say multiply it by 50. 50 times 2M plus 5 is 100M plus 250. Let A be your age. Okay? So I have 100M plus 250, plus I'm going to add the age to it. So by this time, people at a party are scribbling this down, have a little fun with it, and then you say, okay, let's subtract a year. 365 days in a year. Let's just subtract 365 days. Do that. If you consolidate the numbers, or if you simplify, you get 100 times M minus 155 plus A, your age. And then I say, oh, I forgot, 365 is too much. Please add 115 days back in. Well, guess what? These 115s cancel, and you have 100 times your month plus the age. And as long as you're between 0 and 99 years old, you're always going to have the number of the month plus whatever that age is. And so this is a fun little trick to do at your next gathering. The Lawson selection task is a task that was developed in the 70s. There's a premise on the bottom here. If a card shows an even number on one face, then its opposite face is red. My question to you is, how many of these cards do I have to flip over to prove that that is a true premise? How many cards and which ones? Do I have to flip them all over to prove that an even number on one face is a red card? I mean, obviously, if I flip them all over, I'd know everything, right? Because I know what the back of this card is. Is it red or brown? Is it red or brown? Is it even or odd? Is it even or odd? So if I flip them all over, then yes, clearly I can figure it out. But my question to you is, what's the smallest number of cards I'd have to flip over?
1.
1. You think 1. Which one?
Probably you could either turn the red one over or the egg over.
The or means that I may need to flip over more than 1.
No. If you turn over the red,
Yeah?
and it's even, that answers your question, doesn't it?
Does
I
it?
don't know. Well,
That's a good question.
yeah, it's a good question.
What do other people think before I start shedding light on this? What do other people think?
I mean, no, just like they said, logically, I mean, red is going to be the only thing that's in that equation, so it has to be the red one.
You're saying that this red one has to be even on the other side?
Yeah.
Really? Where in that sentence does it say that red ones have to be even?
It says even ones have to be red.
It says even ones have to be red.
Yeah.
So which one do I have to flip over?
It doesn't tell you that the brown has to be odd.
It doesn't tell you the brown has to be odd either. So anyone here think you got to flip over the 8?
Yeah.
Hands up if you think you got to flip the 8. You'd be correct. That's one of them. You got to flip the 8. Because if you flip over the 8 and it's brown, guess what? You're getting out of town because this ain't correct anymore, right? So the 8 you've got to flip over. You got to flip over another card though. Which one is it?
The brown.
Some people say red, some people say brown. Why is it got to be brown?
You gotta prove the point.
What do you mean by prove the point? What happens if I flip over this brown one and it's what? If I flip it over, it could be either what or what? It could be even or odd. If it's even, what does that tell me?
The premise is false.
The premise is false because even numbers have to be red. So the 2 you have to flip over are the 8 and the brown. But most of the time, people say 8 and red because those are the 2 things that you hear. You say, oh yeah, I got to flip over the red because the red's got to be even. No, the red can be odd. I've said nothing about what the back of odd cards look like. If this is confusing to you, let me show you another way that may make it more tangible. This is something they proved in psychology, is that when you have something like this that's very abstract, it can be difficult to wrap your head around it. But if you paint it this way, if you're drinking alcohol, then you must be over 18. A lot of people start being like, oh, okay, now I know what to do. If you're drinking alcohol, you must be over 18. What card do I have to flip over to make sure that that premise is true? This must have been written in the 70s, back when the drinking age was 18, right? What do I have to flip over to prove this? Who do I gotta check? I got someone I know who's 16 and 25, and I got somebody drinking soda, I don't know their age, and somebody drinking alcohol, and I don't know their age. What do I gotta flip over?
16 and
I gotta flip over the 16 to make sure that they're soda, and the beer.
To make sure it's of age.
Correct. So it's similar, but it puts it in context. Now, I've only got 5 more minutes, which is fine. Actually 3, but who's counting? Let's go to the final slide here. Today, I just want to touch upon the stuff that I talked about, logic and this deduction stuff we're doing, how it actually is impacting what we do every day. Anyone here have Siri on their phone, or a Amazon, or Google at their house? Be like, okay, Google, buy me a pair of socks, right? These services use logic to deduce, well, what advertisement should I show? Wayne? He was talking about golf the other day, and the weather looks like it's going to be good on Thursday. So if he's talking about golf today, and the weather will be good on Thursday, perhaps I will show him some advertising on golf courses in his area that the province takes care of, that he should go out and take a gander at. You ever wonder, you're talking about something, you look on your social media, and the next thing you know, there's an advertisement just about what the heck you were talking about? They're using logic. That's the underpinning there. Anyone see those self-driving cars? How do they work? They take inputs, they say, if this, then this. For example, start the car if and only if the person has that little key fob with them and it's inside the car. Otherwise, don't start that car. That's logic. Chess. When you play chess, you try to deduce out, okay, if I do this, then what are the moves there that can be moved from there? The Turing Test. Anyone heard of the Turing Test? What's the Turing Test?
Now you're putting me on the spot.
Sorry.
Is that the one where you fool, where it can fool?
Yes, you try to determine, you have a conversation with somebody or maybe not somebody on a computer, and you have to determine, is it a machine or is it a person I'm talking to? There's a screen there, I can't see who I'm talking to, but through the conversation, asking any question I want, having a dialogue with whoever's on the other side of that screen, I have to be able to determine whether or not it's a human or a machine. So the Turing Test is one of the tests for artificial intelligence, right? If a machine can fool a human to think that it's a human, then it will have passed the Turing Test. I don't think a machine has passed the Turing Test yet.
They've got localized.
Yeah, that's why I was hesitant, because I remember reading something about.
There's a competition every year in Boston where you can take your software and go and see if you can pass the Turing Test. And for some areas they have. So for example, hockey, you can talk, the hockey software passes it, and wine.
Really?
Yeah.
So there are branches where computers are savvy enough where they can fool a human into thinking they're speaking with another human, and the topics of hockey and wine.
And others as well, but those two sort of jump out because they know.
Because you like hockey?
Because you think it'd be about chess, but
yeah, you would think.
It's really, they can do it about wine.
Interesting. That's fascinating. Video games. Maybe your grandchildren or maybe you guys play video games where the machine itself is moving pieces. Well, that's using artificial intelligence and finding states of things and using logic at a very fast pace to figure out how the game works. And has anyone heard of a software called Grammarly? Grammarly takes your writing and checks it for grammar, makes suggestions on, oh, how does this person write? How should you have made this sentence? How should it have been structured? And it learns as you go through and say, oh yeah, I like this change, I don't like this change, to adapt to your writing style. And so, interesting things about that is at what point can the machine just write for you? Or, and then potentially fool somebody saying, oh, they're talking to Luke, because it knows my writing style. I was at, the last thing that I'll leave you with about how logic fuels all these things. About a month ago, I was down in Augusta for a hearing on a bill. That bill was about insurance and town academies. But the testimony before that bill had to do with elder fraud, financial fraud of the elderly, which is a big issue. I don't know if you remember, a couple years ago there was a gentleman who basically fleeced two elderly ladies of millions of dollars. That came up in this testimony, and then they talked about technology and how machines can think and use logic to figure out whether or not somebody is trying to impersonate somebody else. For example, raise your hand if you type on a keyboard. Should be everybody in the room, right? You type with a certain cadence. They have software that will figure out what that cadence is. And if you're an elderly person and you type slower and somebody comes in pretending to be you and they're typing quicker and faster, that will send up a flag to the company to say, hey, wait a minute, you better follow up. Something has changed in the way that this person is communicating with us. And so there are pieces of software and machine learning technology that are using logic behind almost all of the smart technology that we use today. So, from ancient Sumeria up to 2020 here in modern times, logic is around us everywhere. I think we ought to take a little break before Dr. Page's talk. Yep. Thank you.
I'm very happy to have him here today. I don't know how Luke convinced him. I don't know how he found time in his busy schedule to be here, but we certainly appreciate it. Dr. Page, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. And thanks to Luke for giving me a call. There should be enough, there's two one-page handouts that I put in the middle of everybody's table. One is a sort of an agenda, just says logic at the top, it'll talk us through the topics, and the other says logic worksheet. Before I get started, I do want to say I have not been in this building before. First of all, very impressive. But I was looking at the donors wall out here and was happy to see my father on it. So, who was a member for most of his life. He died back in 1992, but had been a lifelong member. Both in the Fort Kent.
Oh,
that's kind of bright.
Yeah,
that's kind of bright.
That's too bright?
Yeah, it's
too much light.
Too much light. Don't want too much light on logic. Right. So anyway, I'm very pleased to see his name there. Very pleased to be here today. I want to do a couple of things, and Luke's setup was great. You know, so get people thinking along these lines. We'll do a couple of puzzles along the way, but I'm going to get a little bit more into the nuts and bolts of logic. And if you, my first item on my agenda says introduction. What is logic? What are logic's scope and limits? We're going to get through that number one item very quickly. Logic is the science and art of reasoning. No, everybody knows everything that we talked about today. You couldn't have gotten out of the second grade if you weren't proficient at logic. Now, you may not know all the language. You may not have applied it in some of the complex ways Luke did it, or his example showed. But the basics, what underlies all of that, you knew. You probably knew it when you were born, implicit in your hardwiring of your brain, but you certainly were masters of it by the time you were in the second grade and got through the second grade. And I'm not talking the smart kids in class. I'm saying everybody. Everybody. Because you couldn't survive. You literally could not survive without this ability as the kind of beings that we are. So logic is really not anything different from reasoning. So when we say what is its scope and limits, what does logic cover? It covers everything you can think about, period. It's absolutely general. And in fact, if there's no logic, there's no thinking. And if there's no thinking, there's no logic. Now, doesn't mean everybody's good at it all the time. And we'll see some occasions of how that can be intentionally misused, both for fun and profit and for other reasons as well. We'll talk a little bit about that. But it is something that just defines us as the kind of beings we are and the kind of activities that we take. So is logic about everything? Well, there is a little bit of a twist there, and Luke hinted at it a couple of times. The Cantor Arguments and the paradoxes and some other things. We'll only touch on that a little bit. Back at the bottom where I say logic, and one of the things I talk about there is religion. And there's some interesting limits at that point. And we'll come to that. But let's, before we get into the nuts and bolts, I do want to use a puzzle, or not a puzzle, but a sort of thing. When we use logic, sometimes we speak very logically. Sometimes we speak just completely illogically because we misfire and we make mistakes and we go off the rails. And sometimes we use logic in the background but say something different with the idea of conveying and communicating something else. So for example, if you go home this afternoon and you're just going, oh my God, how much longer is this? I got to listen to this guy talk about logic. And you go home this afternoon and your husband or wife, whoever, says, so how was the talk this morning? And you go, oh, it was the most exciting thing I've done all week. If you literally take that sentence, somebody should say, oh, that was really enjoyable for you. But obviously what I just conveyed was something else. But that something else, which was using sarcasm, depends upon the background of my saying something that is literally true, but conveying it in a way that conveys something other than what was said. So logic becomes very complicated, not just in the language that we use, but how we use it. That would be one example. We can also say things which are rather surprising in that. And here, none of us are quite old enough to remember that, but maybe many of you have heard this song. There's an old classic, was written back in the 20s and 30s. It's been covered by hundreds of artists. One of the people who made it most famous was the great musician Fats Waller. We're going to listen to just the first verse of his song. I hope you can hear this. Piano introduction. The song is titled Everybody Loves My Baby. You may remember it.
Everybody loves my baby, but my baby don't love nobody but me. nobody but me. Everybody wants my baby, but my baby don't want nobody but me. That's plain to see. She's got a form like Venus. Honest, I ain't talking Greek. No one can come between us. She's my Sheba. I'm a Sheba.
So, everybody loves my baby, but my baby loves nobody but me. Everybody wants my baby, but my baby wants nobody but me. And he goes on to talk about his girlfriend. So, what that would suggest, of course, and what Fats Waller's trying to say is, you know, I have this fabulous partner, and one of the reasons she's so fabulous is that everybody loves her, but she only loves me, right? So I'm special. That's not what he said. Not logically what he said. Okay, let's look at this. Here's, I hope, can you see in the back there? There's stick figures, that's all it is. It's a bunch of stick figures. So this is all the people we're going to talk about. Every one of them, everybody loves my baby, right? So we'll use a red color here, and pick out one of the stick figures, it doesn't matter which one. Everybody loves my baby, okay? But my baby loves nobody but me. So where do I draw the red circle?
Yeah, wherever you are. We'll jump out of everybody.
No, but you're right. They earlier said wherever you are. But where do I have to be on this? Of these 5 people, and we'll say that's all there are. If everybody loves my baby, right? Everybody loves my baby. But my baby loves nobody but me.
Well, if you're on that board, you've got to be on the periphery. You've got to be one of the 4.
You can be anywhere on that board.
Nope.
Somebody outside of it.
Nope.
You gotta be baby.
Bingo.
You gotta be baby.
You gotta be baby. You love yourself.
Gotcha.
Everybody loves my baby, which means I love my baby too. But my baby loves nobody but me. It's the only person who's loved is my baby, but I love my baby too. So I am my baby. That's in the line of the kind of puzzles that we were talking about before with Lou. That's not what Fats meant to convey. But that's what he said. Okay. That's what the song says. Okay. All right, we'll come back. We'll do some other ones a little bit later. But let's go to logic and argument, how logic works. As I said, this is the work, the handout there. Logic, as I say right at the top there, is the science and art of reasoning. And then we're going to talk about arguments for a moment. An argument is a set of sentences. It's not a fight. It's all people are mortal. Socrates is a person, therefore Socrates is mortal. That's an argument. Any set of sentences where you have a conclusion that you're trying to give reasons for, that's an argument. Or at least that's how we're going to talk about something being an argument. So, arguments are either deductive or inductive. Now, that's because there are 2 kinds of logic. And what Luke was talking about coming out of mathematics is deductive arguments. And that's what we're going to talk about today almost entirely as well. I'll talk about inductive arguments a little bit later. But deductive arguments are the kinds that are of primary interest to us, and they're the kinds that we talk about and use in this case over and over and over and over and over. Now, here's the trick. There are 2 concepts that I want to introduce. And these are really, if you get your head around these 2 concepts, then the rest of logic falls into place. It's just a matter of figuring it out, practicing it, or doing whatever you want with it. And it's these concepts that, they are concepts. They're not technical at all. One is called validity, and one is called soundness. And the trick and the difficulty around validity is an argument is valid, not by virtue of the truth and falsity of what the sentences say, but because of its logical structure, because of what the sentences have within it. When you say all people are mortal, Socrates is a person, therefore Socrates is mortal, you know that the conclusion follows from the premises, not because you know anything about Socrates, frankly, but because you know that if the premises are true, the conclusion must be true by virtue of the words, the logical words that are embedded in there. And there are 6 logical words. Actually, you only need 3, but there are 6, and the 6 are and, or, not, if, all, some. Those 6 words, and, if, all, not, wait a minute, and, or, if, not, all, some, if you can figure out the structure of a sentence using about everything you need about logic. And as I said, you can actually do it with 3 words, but it's easier if you use 6. You actually only need not, and either, all, or some, or either, or not, and if, but never mind about that. So the definition of validity, is an argument is valid if it's not possible, not logically possible, for the premises to be true and the conclusion false. Arguments, deductive arguments, are valid or invalid, not valid. Arguments are not true or false. Sentences are true or false. So, this what I just said is the hardest part for people who are coming to this for the first time to really get their heads around. So we're going to do some examples. So remember this, it's right there on the paper. Write the first sentence. A deductive argument is valid if and only if it is not possible for the premises to be true and the conclusion false. So let's look at the first argument down there. All Republicans live in Maine. Barack Obama is a Republican. Therefore, Barack Obama lives in Maine. First sentence. All Republicans live in Maine. True or false? False. False. Right. Barack Obama is a Republican. True or false? False. Barack Obama lives in Maine. True or false? False. False. So all the sentences are false. But now, go back to the definition of validity.
Why is the first sentence false?
Because not all Republicans, there's some Republicans who don't live in Maine.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Now, but take the definition. If the premises were true, if it were true, it's not, but if it were true that all Republicans live in Maine, and if it were true that Barack Obama is a Republican, would it have to be true that Barack Obama lives in Maine?
If they were all true.
If the premises were true, the conclusion would have to be true as well. That's a valid argument. That's a logically valid argument. Why? Because truth and falsity are different from logical validity. Let's take the second example. All presidents of the USA are at least 35. True or false?
True.
True. You're required by the Constitution. You can't be president until you're 35. Donald Trump is president. True or false?
True.
True. Therefore, Donald Trump is at least 35.
True.
True or false? If the premises were true, would the conclusion have to be true? So that's a valid argument as well. Take the third argument. All Republicans are over 70. True or false?
False.
False. Joe Biden is a Republican. True or false? False. Therefore, Joe Biden is over 70. True or false?
True.
True. So you have an argument, the premises of which, the reasons for the conclusion, the premises of which are false. The conclusion is true. Is the argument valid or invalid?
Invalid.
It's still valid for the logic.
Still valid. If the premises were true, the conclusion would have to be true as well. So the purpose of this is to get you thinking that logical validity is different from truth and falsity.
Truth and false is different.
The sentences are true and false, but the argument is valid or invalid, and you can have valid or invalid arguments almost independently of whether the sentences are true or false. The only exception, what you can't have, is you can't have a case where the premises are true and the conclusion is false. That would be invalid. Okay? We'll come back. Now, let's look some examples of ones that are invalid, the following two. Almost all Republicans are over 70. Barack Obama is a Republican, therefore Barack Obama is over 70. Let's work our way from the bottom to the top here. Barack Obama is over 70. True or false? False. Barack Obama is a Republican? False. Almost all Republicans are over 70. Probably false. We don't know for sure, right? I mean, because maybe someday all Republicans will be over 70. But if the premises were true, if it were true that almost all Republicans are over 70, and if it is true that Barack Obama is a Republican, would it follow, would it have to be the case that Barack Obama is over 70? No. Because he can be one of those ones that is the exception to the almost. So that's not a valid argument. Even if the premises were true, the conclusion would not have to be true as well.
So what would you call that, like a leaky statement or something?
That's an invalid argument, logically bad argument.
Okay.
Invalid is is the easiest phrase we use typically. Last one here. Barack Obama is a Democrat, true or false? True. Barack Obama was president, true or false? True. Barack Obama is married, true or false? True. Valid argument? No. Even though all the sentences are true, it's not a valid argument, because if the premises were true, and they are, would it follow from the fact that Obama was a Democrat and was president that he's married?
Not necessarily.
No. So it's even though all the sentences are true, it's an logically invalid argument.
What if you had like two things that negated each other at the beginning? So, Barack Obama is a Democrat, Barack Obama is a Republican, therefore
Barack Obama's married.
Therefore, he's very confused. But no, I'm just saying. What if you have offset premises? Does that ever happen?
Oh, sure. And what happens then?
Well, I would imagine it negates itself and it goes nowhere, but I don't know.
Well, here's one of the little troubles with the formality of this, and it's a great example. And if you go, oh crap, when you hear this, and I'm going to stop listening. Any argument with contradictory premises, where the premises cannot be true together, is automatically, look at the definition, it's automatically valid.
Okay.
Because you can't satisfy the definition of the premises being true and the conclusion false. So, limit case.
Right.
Limit case. All right, so that's validity. Validity gets you focused on the structure of the argument, the logical structure of the argument, almost independently of what you're talking about. Now we need the second concept, because then things become practical. The second concept is a deductive argument is sound. Sound. If and only if the argument is valid and all the premises are indeed true. In reality, they're true. So, which of the above arguments, of those 5 that I give you there, which of those are sound? Look at number 4 and 5. You can limit those right off the bat because they don't satisfy the first condition. They're not valid. So wipe out those. Number 2 is exactly right. Number 2, it satisfies both conditions on soundness. It's valid and the premises are true. Now, if you've got a sound argument, you've hit the jackpot. Because the conclusion of a sound argument must be what? The conclusion of a sound argument
Must be true.
It's true.
must be true. If you've got a sound argument, you've got a conclusion that is logically, maybe not the right term, you've got a conclusion that is true. That is the holy grail of reasoning. And it's very hard to get sometimes, because you can argue about the structure, or you can argue about the truth of the premises.
But in Dan's example, it's not sound, but it is valid. Would that be accurate?
It is not sound that it is valid, yes.
Okay, so the structure is valid,
Right.
but the argument is not sound
Right.
because you can't be, not all
The premises are not true. They're not all the premises are true. And if you get a sound argument, and the reason this is the holy grail of reasoning, is that you and I are arguing about something, we're having a debate about something, and you come up with a sound argument. And you come up with that sound argument, reaching the conclusion that you want and I don't. I got 2 choices then. I can reflect on the reason, and I have to convert and accept your conclusion. If I'm going to be reasonable, if I'm going to use my reason in doing so, I have no choice. I can't step outside and use another reason, other reasoning. So if you can establish a sound argument, then you've won the debate if you and I are in disagreement. The other thing I can do, and you can't stop me from this, I can cross my arms and I can stamp my feet and I can huff and puff and do anything that I want because you can't stop me. But I have no rational grounds left for disagreeing with you. That's why it's the Holy Grail. You win the game, checkmate, if you've got a sound argument. Now, that said, as I said, it's very difficult to get sound arguments. It's relatively easy to get sound arguments in mathematics. It's very hard. I mean, if you look at the law uses logic to establish arguments and points. It's very hard to establish that conclusion with the kind of certainty that mathematics provides, because there's always, well, is that premise really true? This, that, and the other thing. So, anyway, validity, soundness. Once, and you get your mind around divorcing that. They're obviously closely related to the truth and falsity of sentences, but they are different and separate in that way.
What if your validity includes a belief?
Validity is, here's the good question. If a validity includes a belief, you can settle, now here to get soundness, we got two factors in soundness. You got the validity, the logical structure of the argument, and you got the truth and falsity of the sentences. Whether an argument is valid can be established with absolute mathematical precision and certainty. There is no open question. And the techniques that have been developed by the great logicians and mathematicians have shown there is no ground for doubting the validity of a sentence. You can determine that with absolute certainty. What you can't do, usually, is get the truth and falsity with absolute certainty, because they are grounded in beliefs, they're grounded in facts about the world, etc., etc., etc. Like, you might believe that almost all Republicans are over 70. That doesn't necessarily make it so, right? So the belief piece, which is the Achilles heel, is the problem in logic, but it comes in on the truth and falsity side, not on the validity side.
Can I ask one other quick question too? So when you're setting up these, conditions to head towards a conclusion, do those conditions, are you able to reduce them more and more? So if you would say all red balls bounce, do we have to reduce it to agree what red is or what a ball is? I mean, in other words, you keep breaking down those.
It goes as you want it or need it to go. If the argument is such that you disagree about the meaning of all, or whether balls actually bounce, whether if you drop a ball on Mars, it's going to bounce differently than here, all that. It's what question are you trying to answer, and you can set the logic. The logic will work in any one of those contexts. It depends on what the challenge and the debate is around. One of the arguments, it's very controversial, of course, but one of the arguments I've often used in intro to these kinds of courses, pick out something that's very controversial, like the death penalty or abortion or something like that, and say, and you set up, you go, give me a valid argument. Take either side you want, but a valid argument that leads you to your conclusion that the death penalty is moral or the death penalty is immoral. Then create your premises above there, and then start picking apart how those premises are going to be defended. That's where the belief and other pieces come in that make it so difficult to work with. So we're going to come back. We're going to see some more details around that. You're already all the way down almost to the bottom of this. I'm going to digress just briefly and talk about inductive arguments. Because inductive arguments use validity and soundness are not what's at work in inductive arguments. In inductive arguments, there's a different relation that's claimed to obtain between the premises and the conclusion. You just have a bunch of examples, and because you have all those examples, you think, oh, you can generalize to the case. A very famous example being used in people who talk about these things recently. For tens of thousands of years, Europeans only encountered white swans. That's the species in Europe. The swans are white. So if you were an early ornithologist, if you will, and you're forming the hypothesis, are all swans white? Okay, swan number 1 I saw is white. Swan number 2, blah, 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 all the way down to swan number 77,865 is white. And after a while, you form a belief about the world that all swans are white. And the reason it's supporting your claim is because all the swans you've ever seen and your grandparents ever saw and all the ones you've ever reported, they're all white. So Captain Cook goes to Australia, and what does he find? Literally true.
Black swan.
Black swans. And so all your inductive evidence that all swans are white just crumbled. Maybe here you've got, well, almost all swans are white, but you know, that was an aberration. So inductive logic is what happens when you try to structure the relation between all of those confirming instances, or all the things you've observed, and what conclusion you're trying to draw. And that's a different method, it's a different set of problems and issues than the kinds of logics that Luke and I have been focusing on today. So we're not going to really talk about inductive logic. In fact, some people think that there is no such thing as inductive logic. I think that's wrong, but never mind. That's a debatable point. But deductive logic is what we're interested in here. And we're going to come to two argumentative errors, but I'm going to hold those last ones off for just a minute.
Jim, could I ask you a question?
Certainly.
Do you mind?
That's fine.
So this structure of the two premises and the conclusion, is that all there is? No, I mean, I guess
Simply.
I mean, can you have systems where you have to have three premises?
Oh, absolutely.
So
Thank
could
you.
you just say a couple of words about?
Yeah, the number of premises, 3 is traditional, it's easy to think about, it's the easiest to work with. You can have 5,000 premises. You could have, I mean, logically very complex.
Okay.
You can have 1 premise, and in a limit case, you can actually have none, but we won't worry about those today. Mathematically, in a limit case. But you can have that number of lines above the number of premises above the line is arbitrary. I just used 3 for fun, but I could have used 41. We just never would have got through it in the time we got.
That's computer programming, right?
Or you come in, you take a basic formal logic class, and just because we want people to learn, we'll give you 25 and make you work it out by hand.
Right.
Just because logicians are often sadistic. So we're going to do a little digression here, just to work off work some of make it more fun again. And we're going to do the Monty Hall problem. I suspect if many of you are of an age that you saw, like me, Let's Make a Deal. And some of you will even remember Monty Hall. He was 40, 50 years ago. He was the host who really developed this. And Monty Hall, if you remember, if you're really going back to the synapses way back there, he often did a part of his engagement with the contestants. He set up a problem, and behind, as you recall, there were 3 doors, and door 1, door 2, and door 3. And he'd invite you to the contestant to come up, and behind one of the doors was a really good present, or a really good gift. So in this case, we'll make it a brand new Lamborghini, $300,000 Lamborghini sports coupe, right? And behind the other 2 doors are chicken fat sandwiches.
Oh.
And we're going to assume that you prefer the car over the chicken fat sandwiches. Okay, so you want to win, you're out to win the car. So, will you be my contestant? There's no trick here. So, I'm Monty Hall, you're the contestant. I come up and say, behind, I'm sorry, your first name? Teresa. Teresa, behind one of the doors is a brand new Lamborghini sports coupe, and behind the other 2 doors are chicken fat sandwiches, and all you have to do is pick the right door, and you win what's behind the door. Which door would you like? Go ahead, pick one.
1.
All right, Teresa picks door number 1. Now, you'll remember that most of the time when Monty Hall was doing this, he would then review and say, Teresa, and so Teresa, I'm going to open a door, and he then picks, he picks door number 3. So he opens door number 3, and he shows you that behind door number 3 is a chicken fat sandwich. Now I'm going to give you a choice. You can keep door number 1, or I'll let you switch to door number 2. What would you like to do?
I'll keep 1.
All right. Now, this is where the trick comes into trick. The question comes in. What should Teresa have done? Should she have stayed with door number 1? Should she have gone to door number 2, or doesn't it matter? She's flipping a coin.
Well, there were 3 choices, because 2 of those 3 choices are the same and bad. She had a higher probability of picking the sandwich while there were 3 choices. Now that there's only 2, it's an equal probability on the doors, except that she has picked one with a higher probability, and if you're going to go with probabilities, that's probably the other chicken's sandwich, so she should switch to door 2.
But it's a multiple choice question, never change your answers.
I never changed my answer. Once I pick.
Now, before we look at what Teresa should do, let me tell you a little history here, because this emerged as somehow this got into the public started asking the question, what should Teresa do? And this set off an enormous debate amongst mathematicians and probability theorists, and some of you might have even seen in the front page of the New York Times. And there was a Princeton mathematician who wrote the piece on the New York Times, and by the way, he was absolutely wrong. And the person who got it right, in the public way, how many of you read Parade magazine? Remember Parade magazine? Marilyn Vos Savant is a woman who has a column in the Parade magazine, and she got it absolutely right. She was a little more complicated than she needed to be in her explanation, but it was delightful to see all these fancy mathematicians just go wrong on very basic logic. So, here's the deal. Teresa, I'm Monty Hall. I know where the car is. She doesn't, right? So there are 3 possible scenarios. Before she started, the car might, I'll put plus if the car is there, negative if this is the chicken fat sandwiches. So the car might be behind door number 1, in which case it's not behind door number 2. It might be behind door number 2, in which case it's not behind door number 1 or door number 3. Or it might be behind door number 3, and in which case it's not behind door number 1 or 2. Those are the only 3 options, right? Those are the only 3 scenarios. So let's look to see what happens from Teresa's point of view. If she chose door number 1, I opened door number 3 because I know that it wasn't behind number 3. So if she stays with her first view and stays behind door number 1, she wins. If she switches to door number 2, she loses. So under the first scenario, if she changes, if she moved to door number 2, she loses. Yeah, got that? All right. Suppose it's set up like the second door. She chose door number 1. I opened door number 3 because I knew it wasn't there. If she changes, she wins. Yeah? So that's check mark, she wins. Suppose it's door number 3. Suppose it's scenario number 3. She chooses door number 1. In this case, I don't open door number 3 because I know it's behind door number 3. I open door number 2. So I open door number 2. If she changes, she wins.
So why don't I win on the first choice?
Because you had it right, but you moved. You did switch.
You said I changed it.
Yeah, you said you changed it. So the odds are 2 out of 3 that she will win if she switches doors, even though it makes no. It looks like a flip of the coin. It looks like a flip of the
So
coin.
I only have 1 chance if I don't. If I change, I have 2 chances.
Because you don't know which one of these 3 works, right? You don't know which one of these scenarios is in play. If you happen to choose, if it was this setup, if it was plus, minus, minus, you happen to choose the right one. So if you switch, you're going to lose.
Okay.
But if it's number 2, you know, I showed you that it's not the third scenarios, so if you switch, you win. And if it's set up like this, I open that door, so what you got to be careful about here is when she first said I opened door number 3, she chose door number 1, I opened door number 3, but I could have opened door number 2 as well, if it was the first setup. I just happened to, I had my free choice. My choices down here are not free. I have to open up the ones that are the negatives.
Yeah, but you're changing after the fact.
He
No.
doesn't know.
No,
I know which is going on. I know which one I have to open. I'm not guessing.
So Monty never opens up the good door.
Right, he never opens
That's-
up the
that's
good door.
key, yeah.
Except for his last day at work. Then he goes to Lamborghini. So,
So does that mean that if she had chosen one and it was one, she just would have got the car and that would have been it?
Well, no, remember, the question is, should she shift?
No, I understand that.
Right, so,
But
if
does the game work that had she chosen one and it was one, she would have...
and she didn't move it. She kept one, even after I offered her to change it,
Yeah.
and she would have stayed there
But
with
he
one.
wouldn't have opened the door.
So the probability would be only if I changed.
No, the probability is if you change, the odds are 2 out of 3 that you will win.
Win, okay.
And if it was like this first setup,
Yeah.
and she chose door number 1, I opened up either of these and she shifted, she's out of luck. If she said, no, I'm not going to change, and opened up, she would have won the car, but the odds were only 1 in 3 that was going to be the outcome.
And if you remember, Monty they must have gotten wind of, figured it out, because they'd throw in some added complications with the little spin box with the drawers.
Oh, yeah, that.
Oh, yeah, it was a spoiler. He'd open one curtain, and he'd leave you with 2 choices, stay or move, and then he'd offer you a spoiler. If you don't want to take, you don't like your odds, here, pull on this, you can win $1,000.
Yeah. But those were great distractors.
Yeah.
Distractors for this, yeah. So, these things, again, this is one of those puzzles, it's surprising. And what was really surprising, as I said, the number of, tenured professors who got this all wrong. But the basic logic is really, you got to think about it for a minute, it's really pretty simple. Really pretty simple. Okay. Let's go back and do a little bit of history on how did this all come about. And there are 3 names. There's, of course, in any discipline like this, there are hundreds of names that you could, but 3 names stand out above everybody else. Aristotle, a German mathematician named Gottlob Frege, and an Austro-German mathematician, logician named Kurt Gödel. And Luke already referenced Gödel earlier. Aristotle was, in many ways, the person who first encoded logic. And he did it in a very limited way. And there were problems that people knew that logic couldn't quite do everything it needed to do. And it became very complicated, especially around matters of quantity, words, sentences using all and some, and Venn diagrams emerged as attempts to do that. But for 2,000 years, Aristotle was the bottom line on logic. And the stuff that he did get right is the stuff that is still right. It didn't cover everything that we needed to cover. But it was literally 2,000 years where people were looking to try to get a breakthrough to figure out how to do the rest of what was missing. Now, when I say that, I got to be a little careful because it sounds like you're building something and inventing something. What Aristotle did, what all logicians do, is merely encode and make tractable and make it in a way that we can work with it what we already know, right? Because logic is reasoning. So you can't, if you didn't have logic to start with, you couldn't reason about logic. So it's not creating something. Logicians are not creating something. They're systematizing and making clear, hopefully, and more plain and more impactful what we already know about logic. What computers do, when Luke had that list of progressions going from chess up to Siri, everything that is being done there at the basis is only very fancy applications of these basic rules of logic. There's nothing else going on. Now, so Aristotle is the first and last word in logic. There's, by the way, in India, there is a rich tradition of a parallel development of understandings on this, and to some degree in China as well. But those came and went, and frankly, we just got better at it faster in terms of some of the analysis and back and forth. The Indians weren't reading Aristotle, but they didn't need to, right? Because they're working what we all have, what we all start with. Logic, if you're a healthy, medically, cognitively healthy human being, you know logic. End of story. And the logic you know is the same logic the Sumerians knew, and it's the same logic that tribes in New Guinea know right now. Now, we go all the way from Aristotle up to the 19th century. The 19th century is the century of great breakthroughs in mathematics and logic. And many, many names are there, but the most important person is a German mathematician named Gottlob Frege. And in 1879, he wrote a book called The Begriffsschrift, or Concept Notation. And in that, he discovered and he developed the breakthrough that Aristotle was lacking. And the way he did it, and I won't get into a lot of details here, the way he did it was he applied the notion of a mathematical function to a natural sentence of language, in German in his case, but we could do it in English. So he was able to break inside the sentence. The logic before had been relationships of sentences like we have there, and he was able to talk about the internal logical structure of sentences. And I have, and I'll pass this around. By the way, I'll talk about the bibliography I left with later. He used a particular kind of notation which only he ever used, and the people who were learning from him, Giuseppe Peano, the great Italian mathematician, and Russell and Whitehead, the English logicians, had to change it. They had to translate the notation, which is an interesting ideography. It's two-dimensional. I'll pass this book around and have a look at the kind of notation that's involved there. And so Frege had if he hadn't done it in 1879, certainly within another 20, 30, 40 years, other mathematicians were working, moving fast in that direction because of their analyses that were going on. And somebody else would have come up with it. But he gets the credit, he was first. And the next big work that came after his was the Principia Mathematica of Bertrand Russell and Alfred North Whitehead, where they tried to show that mathematics was simply logic in a more complex form. It doesn't work for reasons we don't need to go into here, but Principia Mathematica is in 3 volumes, all of this size. I'm going to pass this around too. It is hundreds and hundreds of pages of formulas following one after the other. It looks like this. I'll pass this around. On page 200, he finally proves that 1 + 1 = 2. So you can have a look at this if you'd like, just to get a sense of the. And remember, this is pre-computers, so this was all done by hand, and it had to be pre-computers because computers are based on this mathematics and this development. So from about 1870 to about 1930, 35. All the work of the mathematical logicians were doing the analysis and setting up to make computers possible. Because computers are only automated logic machines. Only automated logic machines. Now, maybe we are too, but that's a different question. Kurt Gödel, which, by the way, he was arguably the greatest of logicians, arguably the greatest mathematician in the 20th century, but it shows the limits of, one way it shows the limits of logic. He was absolutely brilliant. He went on to prove that there are truths that are not provable in any axiomatic system. And so there's a limit to any logic system. There's a limit to what, and if we're logic systems, then there's a limit to what we can know. And you tie that with what Cantor did, and now you're off into some interesting territory. We'll come back and get into that in a minute. But Gödel himself, arguably the most logical, one of the 3 or 4 most logical human beings who's ever lived, starved himself to death because he thought he was afraid of being poisoned. Thank you. I mean, One can be very logical, and it doesn't mean you're going to have a happy or a good life, right? There's an important lesson there. There's a difference between those things.
You don't need to be logical to be rational.
You need logic to be rational, but being rational doesn't guarantee you're going to act rationally, right? Oh, I'm afraid they're going to poison me, so I won't eat, so I'll starve myself to death. I mean, that's the logic of what happened to it. And he only died in the early 70s, I think. In fact, I knew a number of people who knew him, and he was very reclusive, very paranoid. There's another great story. I apologize, I'm diverging here, but we're getting close to lunch. He was his closest intellectual companion in the last 30 years of his life was Albert Einstein. And Einstein said, I stay at the Institute for Advanced Study for the pleasure of walking Dr. Gödel home every evening. And when she learned it. And when Gödel went to become a United States citizen, because he was a refugee from the Nazis, Einstein sponsored him. And Gödel, who was very, very serious about all his studies, got the Constitution and all the papers and decided that he had discovered a contradiction in the Constitution. And this meant that the United States government was founded on a logical fallacy, and etc. And Einstein was desperately afraid that he was going to raise this during his hearing to determine whether he could become a citizen. So Einstein, told him, whatever, don't talk about this. It's interesting, but this will be. They went in, and the judge was engaging in a conversation with Gödel, and he said, "Well, I understand you're a refugee from the Nazis, and it's good to know that with our system of government, such a thing could never happen here," which was 10 minutes or so I've got left. Let's look at the last question in logic and religion, politics, and ethics. And before we do that, I want to go back and just go back to the bottom of the work page, where I say there's two common argumentative errors, two places that humans just make errors. And there's lots of them, by the way. There's just two I want to talk about today. One are what are called ad hominem attacks. Now, ad hominem is Latin for to the man. And what that means is, Luke and I are arguing about, it doesn't matter what. I mean, we're arguing about the death penalty, or we could be arguing about the Red Sox, right? And I'm winning the argument, right? I've got the case, I got all the statistics on the Red Sox and all the rest. And Luke just, out of his frustration, he goes, "Well, what do you know? I saw you, you speed all the time, and you're secretly a Yankees fan. And you're secretly a Yankees fan, and you throw rocks at squirrels." Let's for the moment say all of those are true. I'm a Yankees fan, I throw rocks at squirrels, but that's a nice device to get all of because you're listening to our debate, to get Paige throws rocks at squirrels. But the argument was not about whether I'm a nice guy. The argument was about the Red Sox, right? So an ad hominem attack changes the topic. It says something about the person rather than about the validity, the soundness, the legitimacy of their argument. And if you listen to the nightly news, or you listen to the news feeds, half of what is reported are ad hominem attacks. I don't care which side of the aisle you're on. They're afraid, people are afraid to engage the argument itself, whichever side it's on, it doesn't matter which. And they substitute personal attacks. Now, from a rhetorical device to work up your anger or something, that can be very effective. But in terms of rationally addressing an argument and therefore rationally leading one to a conclusion, it is supremely, I think, it's actually immoral and unethical. And so,
but it's done every day.
And it's done every day, all the time, everywhere. Yep. The second one, the second one appeals to authority. And appeals to authority substitute the supposed authority of an individual or group for an argument. So Luke and I are arguing again about the Red Sox, and he's boxing me into a corner about why this setup isn't going to work well over 180 games. And I said, well, course it's going to be because, oh, I forget, who's the general manager of the Red Sox? Anyway, Mr. Smith. Well, of course it's going to work, because Mr. Smith says so, and he knows what he's doing. Well, Mr. Smith may know what he's doing, and he may be a good manager, but the fact that he said it by itself doesn't make it a good argument, any more than if you appeal to an authority just because they're an authority, that's not sufficient. Now, there are a couple of exceptions to this, I'll come back to that in a moment. But generally speaking, someone's an authority because they've done the logical thinking about what they're talking about, and it can be used as a shorthand then. Well, you know, Einstein knew a lot about the cosmos and physics, so we wouldn't say the general relativity theory is true because Einstein said so. That, at best, would be a shorthand. Look, Einstein did all the work, and if we went back and recreated his work, we'd get to the same conclusion. That's okay. But, well, Einstein was you know, the greatest scientist of the 20th century. He had lots of faults. You know, he changed his mind a number of times. So simply because he thought something at one time or another, nothing much follows from that. But again, here we have a case where you're substituting something else for the rationality of the argument at hand. Now, there are exceptions. If you're an umpire in baseball, for example, and you're the second base umpire, and somebody comes screaming, you know, on a stolen base from first to second, it's a close play, and the guy comes and slides in, catches the ball, and let's say he beat the pitch. I mean, he beat the throw, but the umpire says, "You're out." Is he out? He's out because the umpire says so, not because in the umpire. We have set up the rules of baseball so that even if the umpire is wrong about the physical facts in the world, he's right. Right? And there's a very famous case of that where, and I'm going to get the names wrong, but this was back 30, 40 years ago, and there was a case of the guy slid in, and the umpire's right overlooking second base, and there's a hesitation, and the runner goes, "What am I?" And the umpire quite correctly says, "You ain't nothing till I tell you." And that's where authority works. But those are very, very limited cases. Okay? So, in the last couple of minutes I've got here, if we look at the topics and we keep those ideas of an ad hominem attack or an illegitimate appeal to authority in the background, then you look at logic and, I'm going to skip around a little bit, politics. The logic of a political argument is one that is critical to our behavior and our activities as a society, the kind of society, the democratic society we are. When you walk away, and most of the time people walk away knowing what they're doing, and they substitute appeals to authority or ad hominem attacks, and there's other ones as well, but these are two very common ones. I believe that this is supremely, the failure to adhere to the rules of logic is supremely anti-democratic, anti-good government, even if you're a parliamentary system, whatever it might be. When you substitute anything for reason in politics, you are on your way to bad outcomes. Bad outcomes. So logic has a role, absolute critical role to play in how we organize and run our society. Same point could be made in terms of ethics. We do not typically allow appeals to authority in ethics, even though that's sort of a natural first start for it, either in any of the religious codes, for example. But in our country, we do not allow an appeal to authority that something is the case because the Bible says so, or because the Quran says so, or any other holy text. We may use those, and we may draw upon them for various things, but from a point of organizing ourselves ethically, we do not allow those appeals to authority to stand as the definitive answer to a question, to an ethical question. If you're not going to do that, then all you've got to work with is reason. All you've got to work with is reason. And that's a very, as we know, that's a very fragile, but very important instrument. In religion, in faith, it works out a little, it's more complicated. And the great religious thinkers, in my mind, have recognized this, that there are things when you are talking and you are organizing your behavior along a religious basis. Here, you do have things that you probably can't touch with logic. Logic is not the same thing as faith. Faith is not, well, I haven't figured out the logic of that. They are different areas. There's a lot of debate about where you draw that line, but they are fundamentally different kinds of being. And people make a lot of errors when they try to apply one domain to the other in the wrong way. Whether you try to substitute faith for reason, or you try to take reason into the realm where faith is master, if you will. And you can actually, this is not just me up here waving my hands, you can actually show this mathematically. And now we get into, this is the areas that Luke started to touch on. There are things that we can prove mathematically, that there are things that we can't prove mathematically. There are things logical that establish their own limits in human experience. One of the ways we did that is Luke talked about the Cantor Argument, and if we had another opportunity or more time, I'll tell you how it started. It starts back with Galileo. Well, I don't have to grind it up. Think of all the natural numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, blah, 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 blah. Think of all the even numbers, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14. You can match them up. You want to say how many, are there more natural numbers than even numbers? And you want to say, yeah, there's twice as many. Turns out they're the same number, because you can match them up one to one. And that is when you get into the notion of infinity. And Cantor came along, and this will be the last piece I'll end with, because it is the mind-blowing piece. Cantor showed mathematically that, first of all, there are an infinite numbers of different infinities. And second, that no mathematical system can capture them all. There are things, therefore, that sit beyond the limits of mathematics and sit beyond the limits of logic. You don't know what those are. You can't talk about them, because you're going to talk about it using logic, and logic runs out at that defined point. So in religion, it becomes a lot more complicated. Now, the use of religion in holy text and the religious debates we give, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about one's sense of the divine, a sense of talk of an absolute or God, or whatever it may be. But retreating back from that, more into what our affairs, logic is the best and the only defense we have if reason is going to govern our activities as a human species. And so that's why getting this right and applying it in so many ways is we all have fun with the puzzles, and the mathematicians learn on how to organize and think more clearly about it and think more better about it. These are good mind-sharpening exercises. But where logic really plays out is in the courtroom, it's in the halls of our government, in how we do business and how we behave with one another day in and day out. So with that, I think I'd be happy, subject to your condition, to take a question or a comment or two, but then I know I'm now standing between
The lunch is
everybody and
not,
lunch.
it's not here yet.
Oh, well, there time for whatever. There you go.
He asked me what time he said Tuesday, pretty well.
One question that I have is, it seems that there is this space where faith and reason can somewhat, I'm trying to choose my words carefully here. I'm not going to say commingle, but can complement one another.
Complement's a good term, sure.
And I'm thinking about like the writings of Thomas Aquinas, right, where he tries to use the validity of his argument to set up, he tries to argue the proof of deity.
Yeah.
And he tries to set it up not as a straw man argument, where you try to put up your opposition's argument in a weak way so you can just knock it down, but in a stronger way. He tries to actually argue the opposite end and then come in after that.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's not like it's the third rail that you can't touch. You just have to be very careful, I think, probably, or am I missing?
Well, complementarity is I think the right way to look at that. But here's a bit of a challenge. There are lots of proofs. There's probably half a dozen of them that have come through history. I got a proof of the existence of God. And if they were sound arguments, then from a rational perspective, you would have to say, okay, you've established it, there is a God, right? But you got to look at the definition of soundness. They're very good, and Aquinas and others were excellent at creating the valid argument, but it's got to be sound. So the premises have to be true, and here's where we have to bring in, and I apologize for a little bit of hand-waving here, the truth of those premises, some of them are inevitably, because they're based on human experience, are going to be inductively based, and you can never establish the inductive base with the certainty of the deductive piece. If you're going to get around that problem, then you have to be able to extract out of pure logical principles themselves the truth of those. So the logical structure has to establish the truth of the premises. Aquinas tries to do that, Plotinus tries to do that, a number of others. And there's one of the things Gödel did in his later life was to really spend a lot of time with a few of those arguments, and they never quite.
It comes down to the belief thing that you had mentioned earlier on the soundness part.
Soundness. The whole thing today is, if you take nothing else other than frustration around Monty Hall or some of Luke's things, is that notion of soundness and validity. If once you're comfortable with that, everything else. There's a lot of technical pieces, and application gets very complicated, but it all comes down to those two ideas.
Is there one statement? Is one statement more true than another if there are more valid premises?
Validity is all or nothing. Remember, premises aren't valid. Premises are true or false. Okay. The argument is valid. So, and once you have an argument, it can be 3 premises, it can be 3,000 premises. The whole thing is either valid or it's invalid. End of story.
I've got a question, like, we were talking about the limits of certain logic. What if we have something strange like, quantum physics or something, where we have a state, it's not a binary thing anymore, it's like they shoot something and it's
a superposed state.
Yeah, it's in 2 places at one time, or it's the same object, like flip sides at the same time.
Yep.
How do we explain that logically? And is it just because we don't know what the premise is, or is it, I don't even know how to get logic out of that.
Apologies for this, but there were attempts for about 30, 40 years to develop a quantum logic where certain of the, are you a mathematician?
No, not at all.
Oh, okay. No, but some of the vector spaces behave differently in Hilbert space, but some of the logic laws were different.
Okay.
With the way we constructed, if you had A and B, you can usually get A and B. Right. Some of those failed in quantum logic. It turns out it doesn't resolve the trick. A superposed state looks like a contradiction, so you get rid of the contradiction by simply allowing that to be a probabilistic, resolved probabilistically.
Okay.
So short answer.
Right.
So this thing about belief, am I hearing it right that the so-called truth based on a religious belief is in and of itself not sound? That you can't say it's sound because it's based on something that can be speculated about but can't be demonstrated, even logically?
A little careful about the word soundness here. Remember, a belief is typically a sentence. Maybe it's a set of sentences or it's a complex set of sentences. Those are not sound or unsound. Those are true or false. The argument of which they're participating
I know it's up here, but
is whether it's sound. So a religious, if you wanted to argue, let's make one up. And I'm going to make one up sort of crazy, but my God says that you must drive on the left-hand side of the road.
British God.
British God. We live according to my God's laws, therefore we must drive on the left-hand side of the road. Okay, that's a valid argument. Right? God says you must drive on the left-hand. God says if you live here, you must drive on the left-hand side of the road. We live here, therefore we must drive on the left-hand side of the road.
So the truthfulness of that premise is questionable?
Sure. Now, let's look at that one.
Yeah.
God says, if you live here, you must drive on the left-hand side of the road. We live here, wherever here is. God says, if you live in Maine, you must drive on the left-hand side of the road. We live in Maine, therefore we must drive on the left-hand side of the road. That's a valid argument. right? If the premises were true, the conclusion would have to be true as well.
If it's your God also.
Well, we haven't, no, the argument is valid, period. If the premises were true, if it were true that my God says we must drive on the left-hand side of the road if you live in Maine, and if it's true that we live in Maine, then it must be true that we must drive on the left-hand side of the road. We're supposed to. But the soundness, now we have to, there's two premises. God said if you live in Maine, you have to drive on the left-hand side of the road. We live in Maine. Second premise is true. We live in Maine. So the first sentence is, God says we have to drive on the left-hand side of the road. Now, this is my belief, right? This is my religious belief. So I said, that's true. And what are you going to do first thing? If you want to challenge me, you're going to say, what's this appeal to authority doing here? What's the truth of, what establishes the truth of God says you have to drive on the left-hand side of the road? I was, he told me. Well, that doesn't make it true. The fact that he doesn't make it true. So it's not a sound, it's a valid but unsound argument. And it's unsound because the belief is just a simple appeal to authority. That's how it works. And that's why a lot of, but what you pointed out is, in a very simplified form, a lot of what passes for arguments out in the world. Well, of course, this is the way it is. So therefore, here's the valid argument. The validity is the easy part.
And the same argument applies in politics, I presume, because they're overlapping.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
I
absolutely.
think you even see it in some sense in academia. I've read some about where there's an appeal to authority, like, oh yeah, they published that, paper's been published, it's peer reviewed, that means it's fine, but there are camps of people trying to replicate some of these academic papers, and they aren't able to replicate the results that they assumed. And so is that argument an appeal to authority?
Well, if it stops there, if it was, this is true because Luke published this in the Annals of Mathematics. No, he published it. He published it in the Annals of Mathematics. That's a true statement. But that's not what makes the sentence true. What makes the sentence true is whatever proof is in there. And you might have got it wrong, and your peers might have missed it.
To the PhD candidates who build their thesis on works that were done that are no longer replicable. I mean, I hate to get into the academics, but I know that's your bailiwick. So
well, here, Francois is here with us today, is the Dean of the Honors College at the University of Maine, so he can give you chapter and verse on this. But the fact is that if we go back 200 years, 300 years, brilliant people at work, most of them were wrong about almost everything. Today,
I'll just reflect back your earlier statement about inductive logic. I'm a scientist, and so a lot of the logic.
Can people hear?
Yeah. A lot of the logic that we use in science is this inductive logic, and so there is an inherent uncertainty, and the way we correct for that is to go back and do another experiment. And so I could build my hypothesis as a PhD student on some incorrect, something that turns out to be incorrect, and maybe I get a little closer. Because I try to replicate it, I don't get there, and I find something new, right? And then the next person finds something new beyond that. So there's that self-correction, at least it's intended to be there in science, that it's never really certain, but it's hopefully self-correcting and improving. And we do seem to have, we seem to have a better understanding of many bits of science than we did 200 years ago.
So you never get beyond the increased possibility of a thing.
Yeah, it's for sciences.
Yes.
And I realized that I left out, this was a great opportunity, I left out 2 bullet points there. After Aristotle, Frege, and Gödel, 2 bullet points. Logic is not science, and logic is not psychology. So this is a perfect segue from what Francois just said. There is a science of there is an art and science of logic, but it is not the science that is done with Francois does. What Francois does, which is create hypotheses and test them using inductive processes, you use logic to do that evaluation. So logic has to be your fixed point. The scientific method based on logic has to be the fixed point of what he does. So logic itself is not a science in the sense that biology or physics or chemistry is. It's also not psychology. That's a very common thought throughout the history is people, this is, in fact, George Boole, one of the great logicians of the 19th century, Irish mathematician, wrote a very important treatise on logic called The Laws of Thought. Great work, awful title, because they're not the laws of thought. Oftentimes we don't think illogically. But remember, we had to, if logic was just psychology, then it wouldn't apply to the world outside of us, right? There was still, back when there were dinosaurs, or, there were 2 dinosaurs in one spot and 2 dinosaurs in another spot, there were 4 dinosaurs. Even if there were nobody around who could think about 2 + 2 = 4, right? And if you thought the dinosaurs could think, go back an extra billion years when there were just microbes or planets whirling around. It is a very common mistake to think that logic is just the laws. It can't be. Psychology is a science like chemistry in its mature state. Psychology is a science like biology. Maybe it is biology, I don't know. Logic can't be. Logic has to be fixed because it's the only tool you've got to evaluate the biology and the logic and the psychology, the biology and the psychology and the other ologies. So logic sits outside of you. It sits in addition to human cognitive powers, and the fact that it can't be an inductive science. Lewis Carroll had a great argument, and it was Achilles. He used to like to talk about Achilles a lot because Achilles was fast runner but slow-witted. So Achilles, I'm going to give you an argument. And you need to know everything you need in order to complete the argument. And it could be, he used a different one, but I don't remember what it was. But all people are mortal. Socrates is a person. Achilles, therefore what? What do you have everything you need to know to draw your conclusion?
Socrates is mortal?
Socrates is mortal. Now, was it enough to know all people are mortal, Socrates is a person, therefore Socrates is mortal? Not a trick question. But what did you have to know in addition to draw that conclusion? And we're getting close to 12, so I'll...
If-then statement?
You have to know how to apply if-then statements. And that's not in the premises and conclusion. You had to bring that to the argument to draw the conclusion. So you had to know, whenever I see a statement that says, if this, then that, and by the way, this, therefore that. So you had to bring that rule to that deduction. But then you've set off an infinite regress. Because in order to apply that rule to the case, you needed a second rule to apply the first rule, you needed a third rule to apply the second rule.
And it's turtles all the way down.
And it's turtles all the way down. And the conclusion I think one should draw from that, it is the primary conclusion, is that this is not a reflective process. This is a hardwired reflection of some deep structure of the world.
Well, just this science thing. So you're really saying, if I'm understanding this right, one cannot leave logic aside and expect to really grasp science and its implications.
Ask a scientist.
Whether it's psychological science or any other branch of science,
I would
logic
agree.
is the underpinning.
I would agree, and we kind of think of the underpinning of the scientific method as this inductive piece, but there's certainly plenty of deductive pieces as well.
Because
and
the logic
go back and forth.
Well, and it uses turtles all the way down, because the logic of the inductive science is it's itself deductive.
Yeah, so you have to get to the underpinnings if you're really going to evaluate the so-called validity of science.
What evaluates logic? Can logic evaluate itself, or is that where you...
Logic can evaluate itself. Logic can evaluate itself.
It's the only thing that's self-evaluating.
And if it wasn't, it would be nothing. There is no alternative to logic self-validation. There's no rational alternative to logic, because that's what rationality is.
Is logic progressive?
In what sense?
This
Well,
is
it
where
sounds like
it
it sounds like a perfect science where there is no, there's no room to interpret any of it. It is what it is, and that's it.
Yeah. Now,
So
there
therefore it's not
are
progressive.
elements, and as it gets into its complexities of how it's applied, and questions about inductive logic, there's a lot of room for debate in that. But at its core principles, the real core ones, there is no rational ground for disagreement. Because that's, to repeat my point, that is what rationality is. They were very close. They did stuff all the time together. And if you went to a talk with Smolian, he'd always preface it with a couple of magic tricks. It had nothing to do with his talk. Nothing. He wanted to do magic for people.
That's awesome.
My name is Francois Marr. I'm Dean of the Honors College at the University of Maine, and it's become a tradition here for us to bring a few honor students every year to your celebration of the arts and sciences. It's been, I think, just a wonderful partnership for us. It's a great chance for our students to show off what they've been doing, to get really good feedback from a wonderful audience about their work, kind of to show a really broad range of things that we do at the University of Maine and at the Honors College. I'll just say a couple of words about the Honors College. It's really a place where we bring students from all different disciplines in to work on, first on a special curriculum called the Civilization sequence. So they're really studying the history of Western ideas, sort of what brought us to this point in our society for both good and for ill, right? We want to evaluate where we are as a society, understand what got us to this point, what are the wonderful features of our society, what are the great achievements, but then also what are some of the problems. And as I'm talking to prospective students, for example, I'll be admitting to them that my generation, many of us in our generation, are leaving our successors with a lot of big problems to solve. And so I think one of our real tasks is to try to help them develop the tools to solve those problems. And that's what I see fundamentally as our mission. So I'd also like to thank the Masons for their continuing support for our Honors Read program. This has been a great support to the college. This has been a program that's actually since the beginning, in fact even before the beginning of the college, it was a University of Maine tradition to do something called the class read. And so this idea of having all the students read a book at the beginning of their journey into honors that will sort of be a keystone for their whole discussion through 4 years has been a really great program, and your support of the Honors Read has been really so valuable. And this year the book was Just Mercy, a really fabulous book on issues of unequal justice and issues of the death penalty, issues of what do you do when the legal system goes awry and actually accuses and convicts people wrongly. How do you recover from that? What are the implications? And we actually have, I guess the last thing we're going to be doing in this year to sort of promote that is a colleague of mine, Margot Lukens, and I are going to do a program at the Orono Public Library on Tuesday at 6 p.m. where a number of people will have read the book, and we'll be having a discussion of that book, so you're all invited. Let me move on, and today we have a number of our honor students from a bunch of different disciplines. I see, I think one of our students isn't here yet. She's actually last on our list of presenters, so hopefully she'll get here before her presentation does. And I hope nothing's gone awry for her. We've got a whole bunch of different disciplines represented. You'll see who they are in a couple of minutes, but the humanities, social sciences, science, engineering, really quite broad. The format is to have each group spend about 5 minutes trying to give you a bird's eye view of their topic, and then once everyone has presented, save your questions, and they'll be up here as a panel to answer questions from the whole group. So that's the plan. And I think first up, we have Melissa Durant, who's a student in political science. She's already defended her thesis, and maybe we get this front light down. We'll get this front light down a little bit, and has already defended her thesis, and so you've done the practice already, and so she's going to tell us about immigration in the context of religion with case studies in France and Hungary. And if you'll just tell me when to push the button, I'll advance the slides for you.
Absolutely. So, as Francois said, hi, I'm Melissa. I'm an international affairs major with a minor in French, and I wanted to look at how religion is shaping the process of immigration for people most recently affected in the EU, namely the citizens who were arriving the 1.3 million in the immigration crisis of 2015. So if you want to flip your slides. Thank you. So my thesis took me a really long time to defend, so I am going to give you a really brief overview, but I want to hit on some outliers in policy first. And I also want to give you a brief overview of what happened in 2015 and why there was a lot of controversy over the immigration reallocation system inside the EU. So up here under legal manifestations, there's the Lisbon Treaty, the Schengen Area, or the Schengen Zone, and the CEAS, the Common European Asylum System. These are all policies which contributed to the rejection of the reallocation of immigrants from Greece and Italy. And this problem was brought on under the Dublin III regulations of the Common European Asylum System from 1999. And what these regulations say is that the first place an asylum seeker ends inside the European Schengen zone. So if you arrive first in Italy or Greece, you have to make your asylum claim there, and they, as the state, are responsible for that asylum claim and processing. So when 1.3 million people, which is an en masse immigration that had not previously been seen, it was an influx, happened, Greece and Italy were overwhelmed, and immigrants were reallocated in the unified climate of the EU to be essentially burden sharing for the other states. I want to talk about why there were snags with that and quite a few problems. And the first, I'm going to talk about laïcité policy in France and French secularism as a societal norm, which has evolved and led into burqa banning in 2011. So in French, theological neutrality in the public and in the public space, as well as the government, is essential, and it underscores a lot of societal norms. So in 2004, all public religious clothing was banned from schools in France that were funded by the government because theological neutrality ensures religious freedom under the principles of laïcité. So in 2011, the burqa was actually banned, including the niqab, which is the women's head covering, which only shows the eyes, and it's finable by €150 fine if you step out of your home wearing this dress in France. The UN actually finally just said in late 2018 that this is a violation of women's religious freedoms. But these were the main snags with the integration and immigration process for Muslim women in particular in France. I also want to talk about Hungary because I think it's less known what immigration policy and practice looks like there. The first thing I'd like to talk about is the Stop Soros legislative package, which, yes, is referencing the Hungarian-American mogul George Soros. It was a variety of reforms which happened to the Constitution and the Criminal Code, most noticeably. It's illegal to humanitarianly aid an undocumented immigrant inside Hungary, organizationally, financially, and residentially. So that's a huge problem because it puts groups such as the Hungarian Helsinki Committee in a position where they can be jailed for a time period of up to 1 year for assisting an undocumented person. Additionally, their church law, it has a much longer name and it's in Hungarian, but we'll call it the Church Law of 2011. What that did was it gave the parliament a 2/3 vote control over which churches and religious groups inside Hungary receive church status benefits such as tax breaks or representation in the military. When this law first passed in 2011, it was originally 350 groups inside Hungary which had this church status. It was chopped down to 14, 11 of which were Christian groups, 3 of which were Jewish. After outrage ensued, they added 18 more, and there were 2 Muslim groups included in that. I know I'm running short on time here, but so you can kind of see that there's a divide between what's going on in France and Hungary, though by no means is France's practice of immigration perfect. Bureaucratic processes and timeliness of application are really large inhibitors to effective immigration. What's happening in these charts, my apologies for the kind of small text here, I know you can't see this very well, but this is by nationality asylum seeker data for Hungary here on the right, and then France over here on the left. And what this shows in particular for Hungary is the focus on ethnocentrism and the sameness quality that they're looking for in immigrants. These are the top countries sending migrants to Hungary or claiming asylum. And the only majority Christian country on here is the country of Georgia, which is this, it's the 3rd one and it's the yellow country, and this is a humanitarian protection rate. Every single Georgian national who applies for protection in Hungary receives it. Consistently over the past few years, and it's the only majority Christian country sending any immigrants. I'll briefly move on to my conclusions, if you can hit the slide for me. I have quite a few up here because I had a lot of things in my thesis, but the main one I want to hit at is the use of Christianity and how it's used by different groups inside France and Hungary as a dividing mechanism. I focused a lot on populism during this. I know I didn't mention it before, but populism was kind of the overriding social and political element to my thesis, and that's far-right populism. In France, that's headed up by Marine Le Pen and the Rassemblement National, which used to be the Front National. And what she uses to divide people against Muslim immigrants, especially recently, is an ultra-secular framing. So it's a neo-racism based on religion. And what that means is that Muslims, because they are identifiable by the way they look more so than someone who is Judeo-Christian, they do not fit in with society, and therefore they're marginalized by society as they're not secularly conformist. In Hungary, it's different, and there is a true focus on Christianity, but not Christianity as an actual religious practice, but Christianity as a cultural signal which you have in common with other people. You can look around the room and see people who have a common cultural background to you and therefore share Christian values with you. And if you aren't Christian, you don't fit those norms. And that is where the kind of ethno-religious rejection lies in Hungarian immigration policy. I think that's all I have time for. Thank you.
So we have two students in mechanical engineering, Connor Buffard, and you see their pictures there, Michael Jones. They're actually doing a joint thesis, which means they're working with the same instructor, Professor Hajrati, on sort of basically two versions of a design project, which at the end may, coalesce, or they'll pick the best of both or whatever to end up with a final design for their project. But I'll let them explain that. Thank you, that's all.
Hi everybody. So Connor and I, as Francois said, are doing a joint thesis with our advisor Babak Hajrati. So we're working on his research, which is in robotic medical assistance. His research is in robotic exoskeletons. So we are working together to design separate but similar designs for a robotic exoskeleton for shoulder mobility. So this is a design that it's a design for designing a mechanism that a person could wear on their body, and it would help them move their arm. And this would be for something like someone who needs assistance after a stroke or any other medical reason. Okay. So I'll let Connor get into the details of it, but we are doing this design together. We're doing separate design. We both have a separate design moving forward, and that's why I'll hand it off to Connor. If you could advance slides.
Right, so as Michael said, there's an emerging topic of research of wearable robotics. And essentially what we're going to call that from now on is an exoskeleton. So it's a mechanism that you put on your body that aids you in any sort of movement patterns that you want to pursue. There's an industrial sector, so we're making these things for heavy labor lifting, like construction workers. There's a military sector, because military personnel walk around with 100-pound packs on their back, and if they had something that helped them, maybe they wouldn't get as tired as quickly.
So this is my design right here. It's a modification of a design I found in literature. So this design is a shoulder-mounted exoskeleton, as you can see in the middle picture. That's what it looks like on the human body. There's a backpack that you would wear, and it mounts onto your back, and then it wraps around your arm. And it helps you lift your arm in this sagittal plane of motion. And so the idea behind it is that it's going to be lightweight, and it's going to be comfortable, and it's not going to encumber you for your daily motions. So you're going to feel like you're moving normally, but it's still going to help empower your arm in this motion. So the way it works is that, as you can see on the left side, it's aligned on your shoulder around the point on your shoulder where your motion is. So your shoulder's a ball joint, so it's one center of rotation. So this exoskeleton mounts onto your shoulder and moves with your body, and it doesn't encumber you, and it's going to move freely when you go like this motion, but then if you want to pick your arm up, it'll power that. It powers it with a motor, and the motor is mounted on your back. And you can see here this black box is the motor. That motor's on your back, so that the weight of it is on your back and your legs. It's not, the weight of it is not on your arm. Because if someone has a stroke and they can't move their arm very well, we don't want to make the problem worse. So it does that by having a cable and a pulley mechanism. You can't really see it in the small slide, but there's a pulley that runs through the links. And this pulley allows it to move your arm with the motor, where the motor's on your back, but it moves your arm over here. And so it does this by a couple of geometric tricks of a simple equation, torque equals force times distance. So what I'm doing is I'm constraining this cable to a small axis where the length becomes 0 and the torque becomes 0, so that you can move your arm freely, but the cable is still able to pass through and lift your arm. On the right picture, you can see I've 3D printed a prototype, and this is for testing purposes, just to make sure that all of the geometry works out. This is my 7th design. I've been iterating through this past year, and I've come up with a final design that I will propose. I wrote a conference paper for the IEEE a couple months ago. That paper did get accepted, and I'm going to be going off to Germany this summer to present it.
Well, hello everyone, my name's Matt Ahern. I'm a 4th year finance student at the University of Maine. I want to thank you for having all of us. It's a great opportunity. I'm here to talk about initial public offerings and money left on the table. To give you a little background, initial public offerings, just when a private firm wants to go public, receive capital through the exchange of shares. And what money left on the table is a loss in potential capital for these companies because they are systematically underpriced. People have a lot of theories on why they're underpriced. There's no real concrete answer yet. So I chose to study 2015 United States initial public offerings.
Thanks for having me, everybody. So I'm going to talk to you today about so CPSA, protein-protein interactions in group B streptococcus. And I'm going to try to kind of pull back to the scientifics. I know a lot of you may not have a deep scientific background, and a lot of the scientific jargon can get a little craziness. So essentially, I'm looking at a specific bacteria. It's group B strep, and this is a common commensal bacteria, so it lives in a lot of people and it doesn't cause any issues. But actually, I'll have you go to the next slide. But what we're seeing in immunocompromised individuals, and especially in newborns and children still in the womb, it can actually cause an infection, and it's a leading cause of meningitis and sepsis in newborns, and it's also a cause of stillbirth and premature birth in children who are still in the womb.
As my introductory slide says, my thesis is titled "The Personal is Poetic, a Case for Poetry Therapy," and it explores and deconstructs the history, models, and therapeutic qualities, basically all of the literature that there is presently on poetry therapy as a discipline through a sort of autoethnographic lens of loss and growth. So as far as my findings went, it was interesting. I found that a lot of my personal experiences actually aligned with the literature that's out there on poetry therapy. The literature discusses how writing poetry can lead to a sense of catharsis, a sense of universalization of feeling, so feeling less isolated by knowing that there are others out there that have had the same experiences that you have had. And also, it can help attribute a sense of narrative control. So essentially, that's gaining control over one's own story when you can feel like your life is sort of out of control, which happens. It can also help change your perspectives on the event or feelings that you may have written about, and therefore lead to some personal growth.